welcome to Pondy Lit Fest 2024. Extremely honored to host General Narasimhan this morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on the Lit Fest.
No, our honor, absolutely our honor. So my set of questions to you today actually is from the perspective of a layman, because these are terms that we hear all the time, but they are never fully explained. So my first question to you is, what is really understood by the military-industrial complex or the deep state that we keep talking about?
See, the military-industrial complex is something which started around the First World War, 1914 onwards. When the First World War took place, the industry pitched up for making arms, ammunition, etc., etc. So the military and the industries that were supporting it started becoming a military-industrial complex. But the term military-industrial complex was used by General Eisenhower in 1961 when he was demitting office. In his farewell speech, he mentioned that we should be careful about this military-industrial complex, basically because by the time of Second World War and beyond, the military-industrial complex started becoming stronger and they were trying to push certain agendas. So that is the reason why Mr. Eisenhower, General Eisenhower, he mentioned this in his office. Beyond that, if you see, look at a few of these American companies which have gone even beyond, they're actually the turnover in a year is more than the defense budget of many countries. Okay, so you find Lockheed Martin, you find Northrop Grumman, you find companies like that which have got more than $25 billion as a turnover, which is more than the defense budget of many countries. So they have some kind of influence. And you also find retired officers shifting after retiring from the service, going and serving on these companies and then, try to project that particular company. So it's a complex that has become little complex over a period of time. Basically, it implies the military forces and the industry that is supporting them with arms, ammunition and the other equipment that they need. That is the military-industrial complex.
So this is a nexus between industry and military. And but then government gets influenced by it. Otherwise, Eisenhower would not have mentioned it. So in that context, again, the other thing that we keep hearing is that, America might be spending that many billions of dollars in Ukraine or, all the conflagrations that are in the world today. But we are told that ultimately it's a profitable business. Somebody is making money from it. So ultimately, even if it's billions going this way from taxpayers' money, so can you explain to us that loop?
Okay. Firstly, I wouldn't call it a nexus. You mentioned the word nexus,
yes.
But it's not a nexus. It is basically, you have armed forces, you have an industry that is supporting it. You please look at it in that particular framework. The money they make, of course, is phenomenal. There's no doubt about it. Because if you're making an aircraft, now that is going to give you a lot of money when you sell that aircraft. Similarly, if you make ships, the moment one ship gets sold, you get a lot of money. So money, of course, accrues to these defense industry companies which are there in the defense industry. And that actually is giving them some kind of leverage. But if you are insinuating or if you are implying that the wars that happen because of the defense industrial complex, that will be a wrong way of looking at it. The reason why I am saying that is, mostly the strategic considerations and the political considerations outweigh the economic considerations in any kind of war.
Okay.
That is something that I think I want to put it to the viewers, actually speaking. I'll give you a couple of short examples to underline my statement. You please look at the way China blocked Australian exports just because the Australians wanted an independent inquiry into the evolution of COVID, which the Chinese did not want at all. So you find that even at the cost of an economic disadvantage to the Chinese, they went and blocked the Australian wines coming up. They blocked 72 ships with the coal shipments outside the harbour and not allowed them to come into the harbour. So the political considerations actually and strategic considerations outweigh the economic considerations. That is the way I think you need to look at it.
Okay, because that's a complete reversal of the popular thing, you know.
But I'm coming to that aspect. Having said that, now the moment Ukraine started,
exactly,
you find that Ukraine needed a lot of arms and ammunition, which many countries were trying to feed into Ukraine. And in that process, these companies are going to make a lot of money. There's no doubt about it. But the thing is, I actually follow this realism model of international relations, which Professor John Mearsheimer and others talk about. And that is the line to take, basically, because no country is going to go to war or start a war because some defense industry company came and told me that, I want to make money and so start this. It doesn't work like that. Because wars are started, the companies which are part of the defense industry are making a lot of money. And there's no doubt about that. But the vice versa is not true. That is what I wanted to put it across.
Okay, so I can understand still, that there is a need for intervention, there is a need for some sort of hegemonic control based on ideology up to the Cold War.
Right.
But after the Cold War, why are we still seeing such a lot of conflict, and you can easily make out who's supporting who? So what is the idea? Who are the people who are driving this sort of, what is the hegemonic ideology that is trying to overtake the world now after the Cold War?
Okay, that's a very good question. You find after the World War II, there was a sense of settlement in the system. Then started the Cold War, wherein there were two opposing blocs. One was the democratic bloc led by US, and the other one was the communist bloc led by the USSR. Then the USSR collapsed in 91, and thereafter you find that there is only one pole, that is the unipole, that is the Americans. And you find the communist countries have actually dissipated into many independent countries. The USSR has dissipated. Now the problem actually started in Europe. Like, for example, you have a Helsinki Accord of 75, wherein you find that there were certain things that were agreed upon, that you will not expand to the east, whatever. And there have been variations to that which have been happening on ground, and that was actually not very well liked by the Russians. And particularly when they wanted to, when Ukraine wanted to join NATO, and then NATO would have placed probably some kind of missiles, etc. in Ukraine, that would have upset the apple cart of the Russians. On the other hand, even if all these things are happening, Russians could have actually sorted it out with talks and other things. That didn't happen. Russia went into Ukraine in 22, as we all know. This is actually a tussle between two kind of groups of countries. And that is what is actually affecting us now today. And the second thing is, Hamas started something on October 7 last year, which was unexpected. And then Israel reacted to it. The problem that came up was that people have slowly now forgotten it all started with Hamas. Hamas is the one which started the terrorist act of October 7. But then people have latched on to the excess forces committed by Israel and the action that took place thereafter. Now you find two sides coming up again. One led by Israel, because Israel has not listened to any of the other countries in this process. And the others started with the Middle Eastern countries which are there around it. So you find certain amount of a country with other countries opposing it coming into play here. And this is likely to happen even in future. So we need to be careful about it.
So I want to come back to Israel and Hamas. Yes, Israel and Hamas is a very concentrated, I know who is my enemy conflict. And we also know that Hamas are co-religionists with the entire Arab world around it. But you also see a certain non-involvement of the Arabian countries. Actually, they like the ideology and they like the fact that the Palestinians are a voice to oppose the Jewish state. But that's as far as they'll go. They're not going to involve themselves. They don't take refugees. They seal off their borders. and neither Jordan nor Egypt will.
Syria
So
and everybody.
what is the hypocrisy playing here? And also the second one is, and I have never understood what Iran does. It's Shia. It has a conflict with Saudi Arabia as Sunni. Hezbollah we know is Shia. What is it? What is its equation with Hamas?
Okay, it is like this. It's an interesting question, by the way. And the reason why people haven't gone into this conflict and entered headlong into it is basically simply protecting themselves and their interests. Okay, every country invariably protects itself and it keeps its interest in mind. That is what we do as strategic autonomy. Our foreign policy is based on strategic autonomy, which simply implies I will take decisions based on my country's interests and my people's interest. That is what other countries also do. And so to a major extent, when you say that they are not accepting refugees, they are closing borders, etc., this is exactly what they are trying to do. They don't want to take on additional responsibilities. They don't want to take on additional load of people and look after them in their own country. And again, the Shia-Sunni thing always plays out in a big way. And when this starts playing up, then they don't want that thing to happen in their own country.
Okay.
So all these things put together, if you look at it, the countries are not very keen on taking on additional load of people because they are already bursting at their seams with having to deal with their own people and look after them. Why take on additional responsibility is something that people would think. So I think that is what is actually worrying them. You see, for example, there were a lot of hoo-ha about Xinjiang sometime earlier, but none of the Islamic countries actually made a mention of it. So basically, they are trying to protect their own interests and their own relationships, and I think that is the way most of the countries would do. Another example is, say for example, Europe. They wanted to do decoupling with China initially. Then, just within a matter of a year or so, they realized that they cannot do this decoupling. So they are now talking about de-risking, which means I will have my truck with China. I am not going to close it down, but I'll try and diversify it to some extent so that in case something happens, I have an alternate source to look into. So that is the kind of thing that every country does. They look at their own interests first, and if that doesn't fit into the framework, they'll just stay away from it. So that is the way I think we are looking at things now.
Okay, so now let's come to China again, because in fact I want to exploit that expertise from you with regard to actually India in our global influence. So I remember when in the 80s we used to hear a lot about when NAM was still a thing, SouthSouth Cooperation. It didn't mean anything at that time. I don't think any of us had the capacity, but we hear it again today. And I was just looking up 54 countries in Africa, out of which I think 50 are indebted already to China. But then G20, we got the African Union in. So have we missed the bus in this South-South cooperation? Has India missed the bus in leadership?
Okay, let me first explain South-South cooperation.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, South means either the least developed countries or developing countries.
Correct.
Okay. When you talk about NAM was actually created as a group of non-aligned movement, which consisted of people who did not want to take a side either with Russia, USSR at that time, or with the democratic bloc led by the USA. So this is consisting of actually the countries which are in the southern part of the hemisphere and which were not actually growing to the levels which the developed countries had already grown. So there was also a feeling that the North is actually not interested in looking after the interests of these countries. So therefore, they coined the term South-South cooperation, because if nobody is looking at us, then we should do something to come together and then look after our own interests. So you find countries like India, China, and everybody started moving into this group, and then you find a South-South cooperation started getting talked about. Over a period of time, that also lost steam.
Correct.
Over a period of time. Now what has happened, COVID actually induced this thing again. The reason was the rich countries, they tried to hoard the vaccine and everything for themselves, and they were not actually helping out the countries which are really in need. So India was one of the countries which did a vaccine Maitri. And through vaccine Maitri, we supplied vaccine to many number of countries. And then we realized that, we need to take care of ourselves. If you are going to depend on people who are actually looking after their own selves, then you have a problem on hand. And therefore, we started taking up the cudgels of the southern countries, which are least developed or developing countries. So, in that process, what happened is, you said rightly that China has got good relations with many countries because they do something known as FOCAC, Forum for China African Countries. Okay, so that is started sometime around 2000, about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And then immediately we also did a Africa Forum where many African leaders came to India. Please don't forget, the Indian roots into Africa is historical.
That's true.
There are many businessmen and basically many industrialists have gone and invested in Africa. While China has got leverage in Africa, I don't deny that fact, but our soft power also is working to our advantage in Africa. The problem is that we can't put so much of money the way the Chinese are doing because we need to look after our own population first. And so you have a problem on hand where China is putting in a lot of money there. You are not able to put that money there in Africa, and so you need to look at it differently. So what we did, we looked at something known as Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, which we started doing with Japan. It has not gone very far, but it's an initiative that has been taken. In addition to that, there are countries like US, which have now started looking at Africa. So I think the answer lies in leveraging our soft power which is in Africa, also work with other countries since you don't have the kind of money power to invest so much there, work with other countries and then try to jointly look at Africa. The difference between the Chinese model and the model which I am suggesting, Chinese are actually looking at projects which would help them. Like for example, they bring the equipment from China, they bring the labor from China. It actually does not grow or develop the area where they are going into. Our model is entirely different. We do projects, but we take the labor from local areas and we try to develop those areas simultaneously. So the models are different. And if that model of joining hands with others and then going and working in Africa works to our advantage, I think we'll be able to have a better hand on this.
So, at the LitFest, and always we are always very wary and we always talk about narrative setting, And yesterday Shamika ji also had a slide that given the nature of China's regime, the press somehow reports it to be a far happier society than India is. But I want to know, when it comes to hardcore diplomacy or when it comes to hardcore military decisions or when it comes to government to government talks, do these narratives matter?
Narratives are there for all of us to see. But in the hardcore diplomacy, and when it happens between governments, the discussion takes place between governments and official organizations, I don't think that matters. There is some amount of reaction you would see, like for example, the US spokesperson reflected on certain remarks about India. And other countries also have remarked about India. They talk about democratic issues, they talk about the religious issues, etc., etc. But the fact of the matter remains, this is actually the SHAF. They actually haven't had a real look into the Indian democracy and Indian religious feeling. The slides which Shamika showed yesterday are a clear indication that there is no religious discrimination within the country. And the way the things are happening, even in the democratic front, the way that the third tenure of BJP actually came with reduced number of seats, shows that the democracy is still working very well. Otherwise, they should have had a runaway election results of 400 seats plus.
Correct.
It didn't happen. So the democracy is very much in place. The religious freedom is very much in place. It is only how people perceive it from outside is what we need to be looked into. But in the case of hardcore diplomacy, when officially talks take place, etc., they may get discussed, but I don't think they have a major role to play or they have a major influence in all these things that are happening.
Good you mentioned the election results, because one of the things that emerged when these results came was that there was external interference. So, to what, and that's the reason why I even talk of narrative, but maybe because government to government narratives don't matter. But if people to people, we get influenced by narratives. And have we voted differently? Has the machinery of anti-India propaganda worked with the people?
Okay. Uh, you take your mind back to the build-up to the Indian elections. Okay. Till about the time the elections were announced, there was a feeling that BJP is going to
Sweep.
go hands down when it hands down. As the election campaigning progressed, you found that it was becoming clearer that it is not going to have a runaway majority like they were expecting. And the reason for that was the way the opposition campaigned also. Okay. They brought in issues which probably were appealing to the people, and that ended up in a result that what we saw in the elections. The external narrative in this, if you are looking at, you analyze all the media report that came up in the build-up to the elections, you will find a kind of a deafening silence of an external influence. Nobody commented on the results of the forthcoming elections and the results. Nobody tried to influence one side or the other. So I think to that extent, I think we were somewhat insulated from the external influences that could have happened. And to good measure, probably they also may not have tried. That's a different issue. So I don't think the external influences really worked in the build-up to the elections and the results thereof.
So I would like to come to our neighbor, and I'm just getting into a session about Bangladesh and the Bengalis and the Hindus. So with regard to the overthrow of the ousting of Sheikh Hasina, are relatively weaker countries subject to the whims and the desires of stronger countries to overthrow regime, or do you think it is it to do with the military base that they wanted and China didn't want it, and is that why she was ultimately ousted, and everybody knows that Muhammad Yunus is not really an independent person. So do we admit that there has been a regime change there with external influence?
The unhappiness about Sheikh Hasina's election a third time in January was well known, even before the elections were taking place. And the reason for that was the opposition did not take part in the elections in the last 3 times. So for 15 years, somebody ruled the country without any kind of opposition in place. So that created certain amount of one-sided kind of looking into things. And it was building up over a period of time. You can see that. And the student demonstration that took place just prior to the ouster of Sheikh Hasina was just the culmination of that kind of unrestness that was there in the system. But the way it happened, actually she was just given 45 minutes for the army chief to just pack up and go, conveys 2 things. One, things could have been worse. Like, for example, her father was actually assassinated.
Yes.
And so were other presidents in Bangladesh. Another president also he was also assassinated. And that didn't happen with Sheikh Hasina. So to that extent, some things played up in her favor, and so she was able to get away. In terms of your question about the external influence, it will be extremely hard to commit on anything actually. There are a lot of insinuations. People say the Americans could have done this, Chinese could have done this.
Everybody's just waiting for that military base to come up now.
No, that military base, she made the statement, I am aware of it, that if I had given that base, I would have still been in power, is what she said. But the fact of the matter remains, if you look at the St. Martin's Island, it is a very, very small island. And I'm not sure whether the Americans would want such a small base within that particular country. So there are a lot of insinuations, but it will be extremely difficult for us to point a finger exactly with a proof to say that somebody from externally intervened. But there are a lot of doubts and a lot of rumors that are going around on this front.
So this is where can we expect? Is it bad news for India? Because everybody says that Sheikh Hasina was a friend of India. In fact, she was the best bet. She's not a perfect bet, but she was the best bet because the Jamaat is the Jamaat and the BNP has never been. So, are we supposed to look at this ouster as really bad news, or somehow with all the forces at play, we just have to bide our time to see whether or not?
You would have seen that India has not really commented
Yes.
anything on this so
Correct.
far, and that was with a clear mind that things happened. There is a sudden change that took place. There is a kind of an interim council kind of a thing which has been established. And please note, Mr. Yunus is not the Prime Minister. He is the chief
Yes.
advisor or something. Okay, so such a system, how long will it work? How effectively it will work? We'll have to wait and see. So I think we have taken the very wise decision of not actually jumping headlong into this without having assessed the situation really well. And I think we've done a very good job of it by keeping quiet. And then we did, on the humanitarian grounds, we gave protection to Sheikh Hasina when she came here. And we'll have to wait and see as to how she manages her own stay wherever she wants to stay. And in addition, there is also a question of extradition which has been put up by the interim government to say that she needs to be extradited because a number of cases have been filed against her in Bangladesh. So this is all still evolving. This is all still settling down. Immediately after Sheikh Hasina left, you found lot of criminal activities committed against the minorities there. The temples were harmed, etc. So things are still evolving. To my way of thinking, I think we need to wait and watch as to how this comes up and how this interim setup in Bangladesh tries to take control of the situation and whether they're able to control it or otherwise. And I'm sure the armed forces of Bangladesh are actually backing this interim government because on that behest, only this interim government has come up. So we'll have to wait and see. There are a number of imponderables there. I think we did a very wise thing by not jumping into it headlong the moment things happen there.
So my last question to you is this: we have a whole century of major upheavals, with the world wars, with colonialism going away, with lots of attempts in Africa to have coup d'etats to sometimes salvage a corrupt regime or whatever, and then we had the breakup of the Soviet Union, dramatic and all of that. So lot of changes, and everything is centered around power, and two very major ideologies that played out. Capitalism versus communism, liberal versus equality versus liberty, and all of that. But today when because I also teach, so today when you look at what Russia has become, the kind of nationalism that Russia is managing to instill in its people, they didn't even mark the 100 years of the revolution. And when you look at America and you look at the way the Hamas narrative has captured the minds of the universities and the youth, which ideology do you think finally won the Cold War?
That's a very interesting question. Before that, you asked one question about Sheikh Hasina, whether
Yes.
she was a good friend of India or not, which I skipped during my answer.
Yeah.
I think she was amongst the better ones that we had a relationship with. Basically because of two things. One, during the liberation war of Bangladesh, she was actually retrieved by an officer of the Guards Regiment of India when she was about to be arrested and taken away. So that family and that support that we gave for the liberation war in Bangladesh is still remembered by Sheikh Hasina very well. I had the opportunity of meeting her when I went along with the Chief of Army Staff some time ago when we visited Bangladesh, and she was actually very sentimental about this whole thing that happened. And to good measure, today we are having a more peaceful Northeast because of her, because she handed over a lot of these insurgents who were living in Dhaka. So that helped us to stabilize the Northeast, and also the communication road communication and other communication, rail communication that we started getting into Bangladesh, which is existing pre-71. those things are again an advantage to both countries, both Bangladesh and India. So to that extent, there were a number of good things that happened during a tenure. Teesta River issue that we could not actually fulfill it. That's a thing that is still pending. The enclaves, which are in possession of each other, those have been resolved.
Yes.
Even though we had to cede some amount of territory, we were able to manage to do that. So all these things put together, I think her tenure was actually beneficial to both I won't say it's only to India. I think it was beneficial to both the countries. So that is the way I need to put this across. On the ideology of democracy versus communism, if you take your mind back to a little while ago, one remark I'll do about the nationalism of the Russians, you just have to go back to Second World War and see how they defended St. Petersburg and Moscow. They were almost losing everything, but they dug in. And then they fought trench to trench, man to man, and ensured that the German invasion was stopped. So the nationalism in Russians is very well built up, and they were a superpower. And so that feeling of having been a superpower is still there with them. And they are still hurting the way things happened in 91 and then they had to lose power. So one thing that is, the nationalism in Russia is a given. It is there and it will continue to be there.
Enormous capacity to absorb death.
And one. And second thing is they also have a lot of natural resources. So which is a strength by itself for them, actually speaking. So that aspect is very well given. On the issue of democracy versus communism, today if you look at countries which are purely communist, you can actually count them with your hands. Most of them have gone the democratic way. Then is that actually does that actually say that democracy is one? On one hand, you will find people also criticizing USA for whatever they have done in Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, whatever you may call it. On the other hand, you find this Russia also has done something in Georgia, Syria, etc., etc. So it is still, I think, it is a tussle that is going on between the ideologies. And to say that democracy is one or the communist ideology is one, I think will be premature.
Okay.
But my way of thinking, democracy has had an upper hand because that has the people's say in it. And whereas the communism, though they may say it is, they are also democratic. If you see the joint statement made by Putin and Xi Jinping in February 4th of February 2022, when Mr. Putin had visited China for the Winter Games, you find that there is a large paragraph on how these two countries are democratic. Okay, so they have their own. They say that democracy doesn't mean the US version or the other version of the democracy. Our democracy is also a version of democracy. So to say that either communist ideology or democracy ideology is one, I think is still a question out there. So we'll have to wait for the outcomes of many more things before we take a call on that.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for
Thanks
this
a lot.
enlightenment.
Thank you. Thank you very much.